The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-hosts and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of Save the Second or their employers. This show offers commentary on the latest news associated with the NRA and Save the Second's endeavor to promote a strong, relevant, effective, and accountable NRA. Welcome to Save the Second, episode 5, the podcast, episode 5. Today is Sunday, October 6th, 2019. In this episode, we'll discuss recent news, updates, and more. We'll certainly remind all of our viewers that are currently watching that on Facebook, you can certainly have any of the questions that you want. Let's see. I'll bring it up here. Any of your questions, comments, and so on in the live chat can be posted here. So if you have any of those, please feel free to chime in. That'll be exceptionally fun. Share this with your friends and all that good stuff. So the more the merrier. We'll have a good time. In this episode, of course, we're joined with not only myself, Ron Carter, but Anthony Garcia. Anthony, how are you today?
Good. How are you doing, Ron?
I'm above average, so that's really good for me. And of course, you all know Rob Pincus. We have him with us today. Rob, how are you?
Doing good, man. Doing good. Down here at the home range for the first time in a long time in St. Augustine, Florida. Been shooting and hanging out and catching up with friends and catching up with my mail and my packages. So it's kind of good to be home for a couple days.
Man, that's awesome. Here in Colorado, we've had a cold front come through, and so, man, fall is in the air. I was at a pumpkin patch with my family yesterday. Holy good Lord Almighty! It's that time of year, and yeah, I haven't got to pew as much as you, Rob. But either way, hey, let's just jump right into it. Okay, so recent news has been the whole San Francisco board calling the NRA a terrorist organization. NRA filed suit, and then the San Francisco folks relented. I mean, it sounds like a kind of a name calling thing with a lawsuit attached. Anthony, what do you think about all that?
I think it's interesting San Francisco actually backed down. They're not known for their reasonableness, and certainly trying to declare them a terrorist organization in the first place was highly unreasonable. But just backing down was the smart thing to do, and they did it, and it kind of blows me away. I don't know why they did that. I would have expected them to do stand their ground and double down, but
yeah, and it seems like the mayor of San Francisco actually came back and said, "Well, they can't actually do any of this," and
right,
yeah, it was so peculiar. Rob, what do you think on that? Rob, did we lose you, or did I lose you?
Uh-oh.
I'm sorry. I'm here. Yeah, I weird thing in the first place. Yes, I complained for years that the NRA didn't get involved fast enough, quick enough in dialogue with the other side, right? Or even really respond to their side, I'd said. So some of the changes is they have been a little bit more response has always been, awesome. And certainly the people that have to the NRA, whether it's Willis Lee or Marion Hammer, haven't been saying things. But in this case, a win is a win, and we have to hand it to the Brewer Law. I think we're $26 million in now, and they have won something, I guess, in getting the San Francisco City Council to back down. So good job, Brewer Law team. $26 million to get them to back down from a silly, nonsensical position.
And that's kind of my thoughts too. It seems like the San Francisco board labeling the NRA a terrorist organization, for one, that's a huge rally to try to solicit for your member participation and so on. So I don't understand exactly why they would want to just fight that, and especially with like the 3 lawsuits for Ackerman McQueen and the New York Attorney General's investigation. Like, that's small potatoes, and they chose to really hammer down on San Francisco. And I don't know. I suppose that you're right. We should certainly congratulate them for, doing, or at least winning something. That's almost painful to say.
It's a win, man. We can't really, say much more about it, I think.
Yeah.
And credit's due.
Very true. So good job, NRA, and at least, standing up for your members and making sure that we're not labeled terrorists by the Communist Republic of California. Joking, of course. Oh, let's move on. So the New York Times had an article and retracted an article talking about like this quid pro quo, Wayne LaPierre trying to, I don't know. It was such a strangely worded article. Apparently, Wayne LaPierre had gone to the president and talked about gun control reform and his thoughts on that. And so the New York Times had insinuated that it was something of bribery. Anthony, what do you think on that and their retraction?
So I've seen the New York Times a number of times now post something just a bit outrageous, post something to get views and people talking about it, looking at it, and then they'd come back and like, oh wait, never mind, we were completely wrong. Our unnamed source turned out to be incorrect, right? So they've done this a lot. I kind of think there was absolutely nothing there to begin with. I think it was just the New York Times again trying to be the New York Times, and that they're, in my personal opinion, a terrible organization, and their reporting is just as terrible. And I think that's just what they were doing, personally.
Yeah, so Rob, what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's just the New York Times being the New York Times, or what do you think?
Hopefully, that the big deal here is the miscommunication or the retraction, right? The idea that it was originally reported that literally, Wayne LaPierre or the NRA as an entity went in to talk to Trump and said, look, we will help you with this issue with money, but you got to help us out on the gun control side. And I mean, it's not unfathomable, right? At this point, the things that have been said and the things that have been done, it is not unfathomable. But I mean, what's where it didn't make sense to me is what's the alternative? Because the NRA wasn't going to go into Trump and say, we're not supporting you. The NRA has to first, before they could ever not support Trump, they have to unwind the embeddedness they have with the Republican Party and with Trump, right? So the NRA hasn't said a negative thing about Trump, or to the Republican Party in a long time. So the idea that they would ever go in and try to threaten, we're not going to back you in this way with this other thing, this impeachment issue, whether it's financially or politically or with rhetoric or whatever, we're not going to back you unless, I don't think that's real. The only unless they have, or the only thing they say, is what we can't do is we can't rally the troops and we can't give you as much money as we did towards your campaign. But I just don't think the NRA has the leverage to offer help. Obviously they have their own problems. They don't have any leverage to actually offer extra help with an impeachment issue, which is kind of nonsense anyway. The whole story has never made sense. So has the NRA talked to them about gun control? Obviously. Has the NRA probably said, hey, we got your back on this impeachment craziness? Yeah, probably. But the idea that those two things were somehow connected as a bribe is crazy talk.
Yeah, I totally agree there. So in the comments, Mr. Todd Irwin has a question. He says, here's my question. Does the NRA board recognize or care that there are oodles of us who are just waiting for Wayne LaPierre to go before we rejoin? That we want the NRA to be strong and we want the members, but don't waste our time or money on wasteful and inappropriate spending. Buddy, Todd, you're absolutely spot on right there. I think, in hindsight from the fall board meeting, after I've had a time or a little bit of time to digest what we saw there, it occurs to me that there are a lot of NRA board of directors. Of course, there's 76 seats available, and I guess right now about 71 seats filled. It seems to me like a lot of those kind of have their heads in the sand. They're not talking about these current events that like we are. In fact, they're probably just listening to the official communicates or channels of communication within the NRA coming from, say, the Brewer Law Firm or what Wayne LaPierre is putting out, disseminating information to the board of directors. And so it seems to me like the board is not only high and dry, but they're subservient to the executives, which shouldn't be. It should be the opposite way around. The board is telling the executives what to do. That's such a hard one. And of course, with 70 plus directors, there's 71 variables, right? We can't say that every one of them is completely in the dark or blind, or simply swallowing what they're being told. They're not going out, of course, and researching for themselves. But yeah, it's hard to say because, of course, there's so many directors. What do you think, Mr. Anthony, on Todd's question here? Does the NRA board recognize or care that there are oodles of us who are wanting, or just waiting, rather, for Wayne LaPierre to go before we rejoin?
Do they recognize or care? The answer, I think, is for some of them, yes. Some of them do recognize it, certainly. Some of them do care about it, certainly. That's absolutely a fact. But the answer is, do enough of them care, and do the right ones care? And I think right now the answer to that is probably not. What we need to do is to make them care, and there are a number of ways that we can do that. Now here we've got, and actually we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, our next initiative as far as making them care. Now what you got here, what you said is that we want the NRA to be strong and we want to be members. We're not going to waste our time or money on wasteful, inappropriate spending. That's exactly correct. Now, what we're seeing a little bit, there was a post put up by Dwayne Liptak a while back talking about how he saw, how he was shown at the last board meeting a lot of the invoices and stuff, a lot of the billing, the finances, and he thought that it was okay, it was headed in the right direction. I think we talked about this several weeks ago on the last podcast. Basically, he is being shown what they want them to see. So all of the board members right now are looking at these finances and saying, oh, well, no, these look fine. But they're fine now, months and months after they've had time to clean them, after Brewer's had his hands in them for months. Yeah, okay, everything might look fine now. So they're not seeing that wasteful, inappropriate spending right in front of them at the moment. Do they really want to dredge up the past? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, do they want to get, how deep do they want to get involved? Do they have potential business relationships that could get ruined, right? I mean, there's a million variables as to whether each board member is going to care or not. What we need to do is turn up the heat on them enough that they get to the point of actually caring the same way that, like, say, for instance, the 3 board members that resigned did. They cared about the NRA. They cared about what's happening. They cared about the members. And in the end, they chose to resign. But what we need to do is get them all, or at least most of them, to that level of caring, that level of understanding, that level of calling for an audit. And then at that point, maybe we can answer yes to your question. But as of right now, I'm going to say the majority of them certainly do not recognize or care about it. Or if they do recognize it, they don't care about it. It's in their best interest not to. That's my thoughts on it.
Yeah, so Mr. Pincus, what do you think on Mr. Irwin's question?
I mean, they are aware of it in a true extent about it. How much do they care? I don't think they are acting as if again.
Hey, Rob, I'm so sorry I have to interrupt you, man. It sounds like you are a bad, like, rave techno robot right now. I tell you what, we'll come back to you in just a second, Rob.
Dude, all I've got for that is domo arigato, Mr. Roboto. Matzo mugi pate. Sorry.
Yeah, Rob, you were fine earlier, man. So yeah, we'll come back to you with that question in just a few seconds. But just before we do, let's move into the Senate report of the NRA Russia connection. This was reported, and it's been reported quite a bit, obviously not by the NRA, but there is a convicted Russian spy. Her name is Maria Butina or Butana. I'm not sure exactly how to say her last name. She was pictured. In fact, she posted pictures on her Facebook page about 3-4 years ago with her and Wayne LaPierre and David Keene and a few others. And of course, then she organized a trip for the NRA leadership to go to Russia, which was really weird. We talked about that a little bit in our Facebook group, Friends of Save the Second. That one is still so perplexing to me, especially now with the Senate, calling them, what was it, a foreign agent during the election. The NRA was they're saying that the NRA was a foreign agent because of this. It's so strange. Man, it sounds like I need to get a tinfoil hat and put it on when I'm talking about Russia and collusions and the NRA involvement. But there's some pictures, there's some evidence that relates to this. Mr. Garcia, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, okay. So number one, we need to look at who put out this report, and it was the Senate Finance Committee's Democratic staff. Okay, so we know right off the bat they have an agenda, to say the least. Right? They're biased, so they're probably not going to put any exculpatory evidence in here. But what we do need to look at are a few of the facts. That they did indeed go to Russia. As far as I know, that's what they found in here. So let's go ahead and read just a little bit here. Drawing on contemporaneous emails and private interviews, an 18-month probe by the Senate Finance Committee's Democratic staff found that the NRA underwrote political access for Russian nationals Maria Butina and Alexander Torshin more than previously known, even though the two had declared their ties to the Kremlin. So why? Why do you have anything to do with these people? And then we go down here. It talks about then NRA Vice President Pete Brownell, who would later become the NRA president, was enticed to visit Russia with the promise of personal business opportunities, which in and of itself, okay, not too big of an issue. But then it says the NRA covered a portion of the trip's costs. Why? Why? That makes absolutely no sense to me. No part of what the NRA does could have had anything to do with covering that trip's costs. Like, what, are you going there to secure us a better deal on Wolf ammo? Like, what the hell are you doing? There's no reason for you to go there. You're gonna go buy an AK? Like, I mean, what are you doing?
Yeah,
it doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, yeah. Hey, Century Raz 47s, for the win, right? But sorry, bad joke there, Mr. Pincus. Tell you what, if you will cover Mr. Irwin's question, does the NRA board recognize or care that there are a lot of us that are waiting for WLP to go and so on, and then your comments on the whole Russia connection thing, man, go for it.
Yeah, I think the idea of do they recognize and do they care? They do recognize it. They do care. Are they acting in accordance with the wishes of the members? Obviously, absolutely not. And so the public face of it as an entity, as a board, is that they don't even know, and or if we know, we don't care. But obviously they care. The back traffic, the information, the subpoenas, the depositions we're going through, they care about what Save the Second's doing. They care about what people are saying in the comments per se. Obviously, a lot of individual board members have commented on it and talked about it and are addressing it in their way. But as an entity, the National Rifle Association would much prefer to pretend that none of this is going on. So that's kind of what you're dealing with. Is that's the first part of that answer. The second part of the answer is don't be so fast to join back up or start giving money again just because Wayne moves on. Because as I've heard meeting very clearly, this is not about Wayne LaPierre. Is Wayne LaPierre part of the problem? Yeah. Did a lot of the problems or all of the problems of the last 20 years happen on his watch? Absolutely. But magically, things don't get better if he leaves. This is a systemic, structural, institutional, and strategic problem at the NRA. Simply having a handoff of the reins to somebody else that he picks or Brewer picks or the current leadership of the board picks is not a solution. It doesn't mean, everything's fine. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of people out there who would express things just like you did, Mr. Irwin. I don't know if you meant that, as a concept, but if what you said literally is true, that when Wayne leaves, you're joining back up, I wouldn't put those two things together. Wayne needs to go, but that's only the beginning of reform for the NRA. Notice that the Save the Second, we haven't put forth get rid of Wayne LaPierre as a point of reform. The points of reform are systemic, strategic, and structural. We have to remember that. As for the Russian connection, None of this surprises me. I've been in this industry for a long time. I've known a lot of these guys for a long time. Does it surprise me that a not unattractive woman with a disease and they took up invitations from her and her friends to go visit Russia? This surprises me not at all. And I think it has nothing to do with Russia and nothing to do with spies. Were they trying to utilize Butina and other access through the NRA to act like spies and to gain information and gain influence? I don't put that past Russia for a minute. But the idea that the NRA was involved in it, they aren't that smart. Okay, they got sucked far in a trip to Russia. That's all that was.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it was some sort of like spy conspiracy thing. That's obviously just some that's just some of the bias you're seeing there from the individuals that wrote the report. What I'm really concerned about was all the money the NRA spent on this, and they definitely spent money on it because it doesn't benefit us. It doesn't benefit the Second Amendment in any way. In fact, it says in here they spent $21,000 for Brownell's trip, although Brownell did reimburse it after it was brought to light. He wasn't going to until it was brought to light last year. So yeah, and then so here's what also comes of this. And this kind of leads into the next point, I think. Now they're calling for an IRS probe into this to look at the tax exempt status of the NRA, which is bad, which is really bad. And it also gives more fuel to the fire of the AG in New York looking at the NRA, which is really bad for them because they have the power to remove all of the board of directors. They can fire anybody, as far as I understand it. They have an incredible amount of power over nonprofits in New York, which also I have no idea why they would have incorporated it in New York. So yeah, go ahead with the next point there, Ron. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, before we do, I mean, these are all symptoms of a common problem: the lack of accountability. And we have another comment in the chat from Mr. Neal, who says the only evidence you need to know about how the NRA cares is the fact that they retroactively condoned all business actions by their members or associates. Now, there's a little bit of truth to that. So it came out from the minutes that the board had retroactively approved Josh Powell's photography father, I guess it was, and some other things that it just looked very strange. And it seems to be like just a continuing of this lack of accountability and nobody who, well, I think, Rob, you've mentioned it best, it's the tail that's wagging the dog continually and no one's stopping that. No one's, taking responsibility for it. And the Russia thing even looks more so like that. This Russia investigation, and the Senate now calling for the IRS to investigate, which is only going to aid New York Attorney General's investigation and so on. It's just more bad news that there's not accountability and there's not responsibility within our leadership. Oh yeah. So it hurts my head, man. It hurts my head. Mr. Pincus, what do you think? Give me something. I don't know. Is there a light at the end of the tunnel here? I mean, are we just going to see more bad stuff? What do you think?
I think there is. I think, where we are is pretty, the scary part about what Anthony's talking about too, with the New York Attorney General in particular, is I think that he's right. They could snap a finger and take away nonprofit status. They could affect the board. They could effectively shut the NRA down and or make it impossible for them to operate financially the way that they currently do. And Washington, D.C.'s Attorney General's office could do the same thing with the foundation, as I understand it. So what I think the problem we have here is that can happen at any time. People say, well, if that's true, why hasn't it happened? Well, wouldn't it be, if the NRA were really playing a role in the election next year, wouldn't it be far more powerful to have that happen in May or June or July or August or September of next year than it would be to have it happen now and give the NRA a year to get back into the political fight, right? If we want to go completely conspiracy theory, it makes a lot more sense for them to shut the NRA down next summer. So how do we avoid that? Well, one way to avoid that might be to kick out all of the people that have been causing the problem, the audit committee. Did I say the idiot committee? The audit committee? the audit committee, the executive committee, the obviously Wayne LaPierre, Josh Powell, take all the leadership, step aside, get out of the way. Let the next set of leadership come in, and then go to the New York Attorney General's office, Washington, D.C. Attorney General's office. You know what? Here's the books. They're open. If those guys made mistakes, if those guys did things wrong, we need to put it right. They can pay the piper on the things that they did wrong. If they didn't do anything wrong, then leave us alone and let us move on. But as an organization, we are not going to stand by the people that put us in this position and risk losing the influence of the NRA in the 2020 election. And why that hasn't happened is simply the stranglehold and control that the Wayne LaPierre regime has right now. Again, let's just keep going back to these legal bills. We, the gun community, we are paying for their legal defense right now for the things that they did to cause the New York Attorney General's office and Washington, D.C. Attorney General's office to have the opportunity to start an investigation. Because whether we want to put a political agenda on it or not, it's like an article at the Trace. We get it. The Trace is funded by Bloomberg. They have an anti-gun, anti-NRA agenda. But if you don't do things for them to talk about, they got nothing to write about. And I think the same thing is happening in the courts now. And the same thing with Ackerman McQueen with the civil lawsuit. So you guys got us into this situation, and now we're having to pay to bail you out. Get out of the way. Let us move on as a gun community. And good luck. Pay your own legal bills.
Anthony, do you have anything to add to that?
No, that was very succinct.
Well said, Rob. Well said. So I suppose I'll talk to you all about my subpoena and deposition. That's right. I received a subpoena back in the first part of August. The deposition was first scheduled for September 2nd, which happened to be Labor Day. The attorney that's representing the plaintiff, the NRA, had tried to make contact with me to change the date. We ended up changing the date to September 26th, Thursday, September 26th. So that's when I gave my deposition from the subpoena. The subpoena was very much like the one that Rob received, although it was a little more refined as far as the dates of they're looking for documents and so on. And this is all a part of the ongoing lawsuit of the NRA versus Ackerman McQueen. In this particular case, I was subpoenaed as a witness for the very first lawsuit. It was weird. It was strange. I've never been subpoenaed before. I've never given a deposition before. I lost a lot of sleep on this, man. In fact, that's one of the reasons why we had something of a hiatus in our podcast for, I guess the last couple of weeks. But it was, something else. It was crazy. I've never experienced anything like it. And I consulted a lot of friends, a couple of lawyers along the way, and I received some very good advice, just to what a subpoena is, how the deposition works, and all that good stuff. That was exceptionally helpful, and I certainly want to thank everybody that patted me on the back and said, "Hey, it's going to be all right. It's not the end of the world." And meanwhile, in the back of my head, I had the image of Tom Cruise screaming, "You can't handle the truth!" And it was very uncomfortable for me in every shape, form, and fashion. But on September 26th, I gave my deposition, and it was weird. So I'll tell you about it. They ended up changing the venue for the deposition the day before. And thankfully, they had it closer to my house, which in the case of Mr. Pincus, unfortunately, Mr. Pincus had to drive to Timbuktu and then, Tobago. And I don't know how he got there. It was amazing that he was able to do it. But thankfully, this deposition was scheduled not terribly far from my house. And even in the rescheduling of the venue the day before, it was still very close for me. So 3 lawyers were attending for the plaintiff, the NRA. 2 of those worked with the Brewer Law Firm, and one of those worked with a different law firm because the case is filed in Virginia. And apparently, Mr. Brewer, Counselors and Associates cannot practice in Virginia. That's another story. Interesting stuff, right? So 3 for the plaintiff and for the defendant, they attended via video conferencing. Besides the video conferencing and the plane tickets for the 3 lawyers that attended, and the location, and the videographer who had wonderful equipment, man, he had a backdrop for me and was recording me, and microphones and whatnot. There was a reporter right there. I can't imagine the thousands of dollars that was spent deposing me. I really can't. I have no concept of what it costs to have a videographer there, or the reporter, the court reporter, or trying to get these lawyers. I'm sure these lawyers, I mean, their billable hours are something like over $350 an hour at least. I mean, that's kind of like the minimum entry for lawyers. So how many thousands of dollars were wasted in trying to depose me to figure out what could have easily been seen on the internet? It's so strange to me that, first of all, that I was given a subpoena, or issued a subpoena, served a subpoena. Terminologies. Sorry, not a lawyer. And of course, it's even more interesting to me that Mr. Pincus was originally, deposed. Oh my goodness, Mr. Anthony, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Just that it's a massive waste of time and money. I mean, I understand what they're trying to do. I understand why they're trying to do it, but they had already really gotten the information they needed. They're not. I personally don't think they're ever going to find the sources of the leaks of all that information. I don't think so. It probably got put out on the dark web somewhere. I mean, we know it ended up on BitTorrent sites, and I think that's how it got spread mostly at first. Nobody's ever going to find the source of it, and they're gonna keep deposing people because they have an excuse to. So you talked a little bit how they were interested in what we were doing.
Yeah, that was really odd. And of course, I was trying to be as open and honest as I could. And so, at the beginning, they asked me, of course, my name, where I live, where I'm from, my work history, a brief, work history, and then they started asking about Save the Second. So, okay, yeah, so Save the Second, yeah, this is what we did. We started up in June, and I was reaching out with people to try to form some sort of entity with NRA Members for Accountability, a Facebook group, and that's how we started this. And then they asked who's a part of Save the Second, and all of that. And so I answered, and then I said, well, why is this relevant to the subpoena? And the counsel for the defendant spoke up on the teleconferencing and said, great question. So I don't know, man. Are we a target now? Is Save the Second a target because we're trying to motivate people?
Well, I can answer that. Yes, we are. And you said before they had asked you about our funding, right?
Right.
Okay. So that's very interesting to me, because asking about who's leading the group, the funding, et cetera, has absolutely nothing to do with the Ackerman McQueen case. It couldn't be further removed. And in your particular case, just trying to find the source of the leak, which again you had nothing to do with. So I think it's very, very obvious that somebody told those lawyers, hey, while you're there, try to get a little bit of info about Save the Second. Try to get a little bit of info on what they're doing. And so they're asking, hey, where you guys get your money at? What's going on? How are you funded? And just for everybody listening, just so you know, the only way we are funded are by individual donations. Go to our website. There's a donation link. That is the only way we are funded. That and money that comes out of our pockets. We do not have a big benefactor like Bloomberg paying for us. We would have nicer t-shirts.
That's right. And by the way, like, for example, this podcast, I'm paying for this via StreamYard and hosting it, for iTunes and whatnot through Podbean. All of that's out of my own pocket. That's not coming from Save the Second. So I'm a volunteer. I'm not being paid by Save the Second or anything like that. I'm trying to legitimately rally some troops, and then when we need money to do some projects, to be able to have the infrastructure to do that, but still carry on.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting and telling as far as what we're doing, and that we're having an effect, that they were willing to spend time in your deposition to ask you about it. Now, I mean, personally, I'm expecting to see a friggin' subpoena show up any day. Over over what did Ron Carter and Rob Pincus tell you about the leak for Ackerman McQueen? Just whatever they can come up with. I'm expecting to see one. Andy too. Whatever they can come up with, because this is what Brewer is known for. He is known for dragging things out, costing tons and tons of money, which was a big complaint about him with that 3M case. No, that's not libel because it's real. It's true. You can look it up on the internet. There was a lot of complaints about him with that 3M case. Anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, he represented 3M in some sort of lawsuit, and I believe the 3M corporate team let him go at some point. And one of the big reasons they let him go, from what I read, was that he was just dragging out everything. He was billing way more money than he needed to, and it was just that's all he was doing, was milking them for cash. And they saw that. They were smart enough to see that, and they got rid of him. So that's what he is known for. He's known for doing this kind of crap. He's known for milking people dry. I mean, look at Ollie North. Dude's probably going to go bankrupt. And that's what all the board members were scared about too. The ones that, in my personal opinion, that's what a lot of them are scared about. They don't want to get milked dry. So I would expect to see more of this crap from him. And the fact, again, I'll go back to this, circle all the way back around now, that they asked you anything about Save the Second in your deposition proves that, I believe. It proves that. And what's even more interesting is, at $1,000 an hour, how many hours did they spend talking about that in the back rooms? How many hours have they spent talking about us in their back rooms? How many thousands of dollars have they spent talking about the fact that we're trying to reform the organization for the better of its members? Who knows? So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, it just seems so superfluous, irrelevant, and erroneous. Those are the words that first come to my mind. Mr. Pincus, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Well, actually, I went and got a visual aid here. This is the transcript from my 5 hours of deposition. So you'll be getting one of these to proofread. It's pretty amazing the way they do this. I mean, I was looking through here, like, they actually cite the number of times certain words were used. So like Wayne is only used 5 times, but LaPierre appears in here 23 times. They were really interested in him, I guess. The word leak was in here a whole bunch. Leaks was 8, but leaked was 34, and leak itself was 10. So that's like 60 different references for the word. It's just that amazing, colossal waste of time. And these places are expensive. The simulcast was $1,100 an hour, from what I understand, plus the videographer, plus us. So I figured about $30,000 was spent before the first legal billable hour on my deposition. And then obviously they spent about the same amount of time with you. They wasn't quite as remote, but they still had to fly a lawyer from Virginia to Dallas to have the pre-conference, fly all the lawyers up to Colorado. I mean, it's ridiculous. And it is very much a fishing expedition and or intimidation. And, you know, I mean, the idea, obviously we didn't stop talking. You actually started the podcast, Ron, as the host here before the deposition. So you weren't silenced. I'm not known for being silent. But my fear is there are other people, and I know some of them, who have stopped talking because they don't want to go through what you went through, Ron, because they don't want to get subpoenaed, because they don't want to become a target. And that's a shame. And what that means is that some of this Brewer bullying concept, the intimidation factor, is kicking in, even with board members. There's board members that don't want to speak up, not just because they don't want to lose their influence or they don't want to lose their position on the board, because they really believe that they could get sued or they could have all kinds of financial fallout or legal fallout because they're afraid of Brewer. They're afraid of the NRA. They're afraid of the entity that they rose their hand and said they would serve the members of. And now they're like trapped in this legal debacle. So it's a shame.
Oh man, folks, you know, it always frustrates me when we been doing these podcasts and we talk about all the negative stuff, the negative, NRA. I mean, it in some cases it seems hopeless. And well, I don't want to do that. I want to provide some hope. So, Mr. Anthony, why don't you start to talk about your grassroots stuff?
Okay. I'm going to break the fourth wall for a sec. Ron, can you zoom me to the entire podcast? I'd appreciate that.
I think I can. Here we go.
All right. Perfect. Awesome. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about our grassroots initiatives today. So far, we've tried to get that petition on to the last directors meeting, and the NRA pretty much ignored it. That was the petition to have them attend meetings, actually do the job. The NRA effectively ignored it. They put it off for additional research to see how the merits of directors actually attending and doing their jobs. So yeah, they ignored it. So what do we do when they just ignore it at the directors meeting, right? Well, thankfully, there's actually another route that we can take. By New York law, the NRA bylaws have to include a couple of things. They have to include a way for the members to amend bylaws, and they do also have to include a way to recall officers. Those are just a couple of things that have to be in there. Now, what that means is that if we got enough signatures on petitions and the signatures were found valid, that we could take certain questions to a vote of all the voting members. That would be taken on the ballot that is released near the beginning of the year. It's the same ballot that you would vote for directors on. So, for example, one of the questions could be the bylaw amendment that we had tried to get before the board previously. So, should directors be required to attend meetings? And here's a list. Here's the bylaw text. Yes or no? And all the voting members will be able to vote on it. If such a thing were to be done as an officer recall, and believe me, I'm not going to go into everything that's required. I'm just putting it out there because I know people are going to ask. There could be a question like, should Wayne LaPierre be recalled from his position? And yes or no. So these are things that could be put on that ballot for members to look at, and the members at large, voting members at large, to vote for. Again, that's around 145,000, I believe, voted in the last election. In order to do this, you have to have around 5% of that signed petitions. I believe that number is somewhere around 7,300. So it's a large number, but it's not an insurmountable number. This amount can be done. In all reality, we need probably 10 to 12,000 signatures, but that really honestly shouldn't be that difficult. So here's what we're going to do. The path to getting the proposition in front of everybody, like I say, it's not that difficult, just requires more signatures. In order to do this, we need to get people going into gun stores, gun shows, rallies, wherever they're going to find other gun owners, ranges, competitions, anywhere they can go and talk to other people. And it's not just about getting the signatures, about changing the conversations too. So we're not just getting in there and saying, hey, yo, sign this thing. What we're going to do is we need to get people in there and say, hey, this is how we can reform the NRA. Yes, we can do it. This is how it's going to happen, and we need your help. Now, what we're doing in order to accomplish that is we're setting up a team, or perhaps more appropriately named an army, of grassroots activists all across the country in order to accomplish this task. So this is going to be a network of individuals like you, business owners. So somebody owns gun store, gun range, and pro-gun organizations. So there are a lot of organizations out there, local state ones that even are 100% NRA members. Like, you have to be an NRA member to join. And a lot of them have leadership that are very upset with what's going on. Those are some examples of pro-gun organizations that could be a part of this. And furthermore, this is going to be set up with a proper chain of command. So we've got the people on the ground floor doing the footwork. We've got state coordinators, we've got national coordinators. We have already interviewed and I believe found our national coordinator, and that'll be announced this next week, who it is, along with a little bio for him. Very, very excited about that. We do need more state leaders, and we need tons and tons of people on the ground. These are people who are going to be making phone calls. They're going to be the people who are actually walking into ranges and gun stores and local competitions, the people who are going to be setting up booths at gun shows. We need a lot of you to come and help us. On our website, there is a volunteer form. That is as you can see there on that, you can go to that grassroots activism. If you go to the menu for a website, savethe2a.org, there's a grassroots activism thing. You can go there. It's got a link to the volunteer form. Also under Take Action, there's a link to the volunteer form, and you can go and fill that out. It'll ask you some questions, and you can let us know what you want to do, the times that you're available, that sort of thing, and we can get you set up. Now, here's something that I do want to tell all of you that are getting involved with this. When I set up this organization and I got with Ron and the two of us set this up, and then we found other people, we got Rob, we got Andy, the overarching goal for this organization that we've all been working towards is the preservation, promotion, and expansion of the Second Amendment, right? And that doesn't end with the NRA. That's where we started at. That's where it's where we believe we can make the biggest impact right now, is to fix this organization in order to accomplish that goal. Once the organization is, quote, fixed, if that happens, or there's some sort of resolution to the issues with the NRA, we're not going to go away. In building this grassroots network, we are going to have something that no other pro 2A organization in the country has, and that's people on the ground showing up to their like I said, again, their local stores, ranges, that sort of thing. But not just that. Once we're done with what we're doing, these are the same people who can go to town council meetings, who can go to legislatures, who can meet with legislators, who can get towns to pass resolutions, whatever it is. We get beat so often with this. We get beat by the left. We get beat by excuse me, not just the left, but we get beat by the anti-gun extremists, as it were. They are constantly showing up and in person. They're constantly, and now again, they're very well funded. They have people getting bussed in for rallies, all that sort of thing. But they are the ones who are showing up in the streets and beating us in a lot of these places. They're getting all these little incremental wins, these little incremental goals. Like I live here in Colorado, and the Moms Demand Action is, of course, based here. We have the wonderful pleasure of having Shannon Watts, the leader of Moms Demand Action, lives here. So we happen to get a lot of their activity all the time. They are constantly in town meetings. They're constantly at the legislature. They're in all of these like committee meetings and stuff. This is where we fail. This is where we don't have any skin in the game, usually. Now, that's not to say some groups don't do a good job of it, because there certainly are some. Again, there's one here in Colorado that does a great job called Rally for Our Rights. But we need to take the fight back on this front. And once we're done fixing the NRA on this same front, the work will continue there. So if you want to get involved with ultimately something that no other Pro 2A organization has or does, something that can have actual, real, true effect, something that will get you out in front of people, talking to people, doing whatever we can to actually have an effect, make a difference. And believe it or not, we do need to actually fight for this right. Yes, it's written in the Constitution. Yes, we have what I believe is a friendly SCOTUS, but the fact of the matter is we need to be out there fighting tooth and nail for this if we want any hope of ever expanding it, let alone preserving it. So that's what you would be getting involved in if you want to get involved with this grassroots effort. Again, I would suggest you go to our website, savethe2a.org, under the grassroots activism thing. I've got a little bit posted up there, a little bit about what I just said. That section will be expanded to talk more about what we're doing. You can keep your eye on there, talk about the different groups in different states, what we're doing. So that will eventually end up being the portal for all of our grassroots stuff. And get on our Friends of Save the Second community page as well. That's the group discussion group on Facebook, and you can keep up there as well. So that's it. That's our grassroots initiative. That's our big announcement for the day, and that is how we are going to retake the NRA, hopefully. All right. Thanks, Ron.
Yeah, it sounds so funny. Retake the NRA as if a hostile entity currently owns it, and
They do.
There are a lot of people that have done a lot of good, and it's so hard to think of them as the enemy. Like I don't want to think of Jim Porter as the enemy. I don't want to think of Marion Hammer as the enemy. Yet they've drawn somewhat of a line in the sand to try to call us the enemy, and so on. What a strange world we live in, my gosh. And yeah, Anthony, thank you for doing all that. Grassroots is I've never done grassroots before. Until this year, I could really just only partially spell grassroots. And it's funny enough, Anthony, you were something of a hero to me. I was telling the guys last night, I was on Gorillas and Guns podcast, and I was telling them that you were a hero of mine, though I didn't even know who the hero exactly was. Of course, in 2013 with the state recalls, man, it's so funny how small a world it is, and how individuals that you would think nothing of end up doing the most important things. Yeah,
there were a lot of people involved in those.
Oh, of course.
That was a very, very big effort by a lot of people. Just the amount of work that was put in those recalls was out of this world. But that's what the power of grassroots. That was something that was never done before. Were those recalls in 2013? It was the first time they were ever done in Colorado, and it was the first time, as far as I know of, that any gun control based recalls were ever done in the United States. And we did 2 of them, knocked off 2 senators in the same day, and then a third one resigned shortly after that. So, but yeah, there was a lot of people involved in that. It was an incredible effort, but it does highlight the power of grassroots, and it didn't take millions and millions of dollars either. We were outspent a lot. We had Clinton and Obama both making robocalls for the other side. Or at least I know Clinton did. For sure.
Yeah, I got a few of those.
Yeah. Well, what's really funny, I just want to throw this in real quick. All the Podesta emails that were released a while back on WikiLeaks. Yeah. There's one in there about the Colorado recalls, and I found it and showed it to my wife, and she printed it and framed it for me.
Oh man.
So
now, of course, I mean, Anthony, you started in the game in 2013. I just started back in April in this activism role. Rob, you've been doing it a long time, man. So yeah, what are your thoughts on all that?
I'm excited. When I hear Anthony talk, he actually has seen this work and seen it happen. And as you guys were talking about, been a big part of it in Colorado. I, on the other hand, have always tried to, sort of set a tone or set an example. Even if you look at what we do at 2AO.org, we put out a lot of examples and information and educational pieces, articles and whatnot on how to be a good grassroots advocate. But I have not gotten as much into the actual rallying of people. And honestly, at the end of the day, it's a lot of work, and I've got a lot of things and I wear a lot of hats. If you go back 20 years ago this year, we tried to do the Firearms Owners Unification Project, and we were looking for 5,000 people. Now, this was before social media. This was chat rooms and, really kind of old school grassroots effort in 1999. It started in 1998 to get 5,000 people together to do a full page ad and sort of draw a line in the sand. A lot of the same kind of things we're hearing now. Currently, I'm very heavily involved with the organizing group behind the 2A rally, November 2nd. And I know we're going to be communicating some information to our members about joining us in Washington, D.C. I've really gotten a renewed respect, and our petition drive in August had a lot to do with that. And you guys know that I was sort of like, yeah, is this really where we want to put our energy? But I got a lot of renewed energy and a lot of renewed respect for being able to work with large groups of volunteer people. And obviously, we're all volunteering here. We're putting a lot of time, effort, money into the effort for Save the Second. And a lot of other people are also doing a whole bunch of great things for the Second Amendment. it is important, however, that we take that power and that energy of we are the gun lobby, 100 million plus Americans, and direct it a little bit and put it to good use. And things like the petitions to reform the NRA, huge. If there's some other organization that's misrepresenting its members under the banner and the responsibility of the Second Amendment and our gun rights, we'll deal with them next, And if there's nothing else going on, well, then, yeah, we can take the power of this grassroots organization under Save the Second directly to the legislators, to the executive branch, to the other people of the United States, and maybe even to our fellow gun owners who aren't doing that much. We can take this powerful grassroots organization that I think Anthony's vision is spot on, the largest grassroots organization under the Second Amendment cause that's ever been created. I think it's going to be relatively fast that people are going to see this picking up steam, picking up momentum under our national coordinator, state coordinator, local chapters in some of the more densely populated pro-gun states. We're going to be able to do a lot of good. I'm excited about it.
Well, gentlemen, I think that's an excellent note to end on. That the future is going to be bright, regardless of how dark it currently looks. And I want to leave you with a quote from Alan Turing. He said, "Sometimes it is the people no one can imagine anything of who do the things no one can imagine." So I hope that inspires you. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you for listening. You can follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter. Our podcast can be found on iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and more. Of course, our website, savethe2a.org, is where you can find more information about everything that we've just spoken about. All of us at Save the Second are volunteers, and a special thanks to those of you who have believed in our cause and have thought to donate to us. Certainly don't want to waste your donations, and that's very generous of you. Very, very generous. Thank you very much. Yeah, from all of us here at Save the Second and this podcast, thank you so much for listening. Contact your NRA board of directors, and we'll probably have another podcast next week or maybe just a little thereafter. Thanks again. Have a good day.